What if I told you that the deadliest tank gunner in American military history couldn't see out of one eye? That the man who would destroy 37 enemy vehicles in just 3 months of combat had a physical limitation that should have disqualified him from ever setting foot in a Sherman tank? This is the story of a warrior who refused to let blindness in one eye stop him from becoming a legend on the battlefields of Europe during World War II. His name was Lafayette Green Pool, but history would remember him simply as Corporal Pool, the gunner who defied every odds stacked against him. In an era when perfect vision was considered essential for a tank gunner, when military standards were rigid and unforgiving, Pool found a way to compensate for his disability with an almost supernatural ability to read terrain, anticipate enemy movement, and place a 76mm shell exactly where it needed to be. His story challenges everything we think we know about physical limitations, military excellence, and the human capacity to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. But Pool's achievement wasn't just about numbers, though those numbers are staggering. It was about proving that determination, intelligence, and adaptability could triumph over physical perfection. It was about showing that in the chaos of war, heart and mind could compensate for what the body lacked. And it was about demonstrating that sometimes the most unlikely warriors become the most effective ones. This is the story of how a partially blind farm boy from Texas became America's most lethal tank gunner, and how his incredible accuracy would help tip the scales of battle during some of the most brutal fighting in the European theater. It's a story that military historians still study today, searching for the secret behind his impossible success. And it's a story that reminds us that greatness often comes from the most unexpected places. Lafayette Green Pool was born on June 12, 1919, in the small town of Odom, Texas, a place where cotton fields stretched to the horizon and hard work was the only currency that mattered. His childhood was marked by poverty, endless labor under the brutal Texas sun, and a farming accident that would change the course of his life in ways no one could have predicted. When Pool was just a young boy, a farming implement struck him in the face, permanently damaging his left eye. The injury left him with severely limited vision in that eye, a disability that in any other era, in any other circumstance, would have ended his military career before it began. But Lafayette Pool wasn't raised to accept limitations. Growing up during the Great Depression, he learned early that survival demanded resourcefulness, that obstacles were meant to be overcome, not surrendered to. His family couldn't afford medical treatment that might have saved his eye, so Pool simply adapted. He taught himself to compensate for his limited depth perception, developed an uncanny ability to judge distances and angles with his good eye, and never once considered himself handicapped. To him, the injury was just another challenge to work around, like drought or locusts or any of the other hardships that defined rural Texas life in the 1920s and 30s. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Pool was 22 years old and working on the family farm. Like millions of young American men, he felt the call to serve, to defend his country against the forces of tyranny that threatened to engulf the world. He walked into a recruiting office and enlisted in the United States Army, ready to do his part. The recruiting officers conducted their standard physical examinations, checking vision, hearing, reflexes, all the basic requirements for military service. Pool knew his damaged eye could be a problem, but he had spent his entire life compensating for it, and he wasn't about to let it stop him now. Whether through sheer determination, careful positioning during the eye exam, or simply the chaos of wartime recruitment, when the military needed bodies more than it needed perfect specimens, Pool passed his physical. The doctors either didn't notice the extent of his vision impairment or chose to overlook it in the desperate need for soldiers. And just like that, Lafayette Pool became Private Pool, assigned to the armored forces, where he would eventually find his calling as a tank gunner. The decision to place Pool in the armored forces was, in retrospect, one of the most fortuitous mistakes in American military history. Tank gunnery required exceptional hand-eye coordination, the ability to calculate range and trajectory in split seconds, and the nerves to engage enemy armor while under fire. It demanded physical skills that most assumed required perfect vision. But what the Army didn't understand yet was that Pool's years of compensating for his disability had actually made him a better gunner than men with two perfectly functional eyes. He had developed an intuitive understanding of angles, distances, and spatial relationships that went beyond normal visual processing. His brain had rewired itself to extract maximum information from minimal visual input. making calculations that others needed 2 eyes to perform. Poole's journey from Texas farm boy to tank gunner began at Fort Knox, Kentucky, where the Army trained its armored forces. It was here that he first climbed into a Sherman tank, the medium tank that would become his home, his weapon, and his identity for the duration of the war. The Sherman wasn't the most powerful tank on the battlefield. It was outgunned by German Panthers and Tigers. Its armor was thinner, its profile higher, but it was reliable, mechanically sound, and produced in such numbers that American forces could replace losses quickly. For a gunner like Poole, the Sherman's weaknesses didn't matter. What mattered was the gun, the optics, and the ability to put rounds on target before the enemy could do the same to you. During training, Poole's instructors noticed something unusual about the quiet Texan. While other gunners struggled with range estimation and target acquisition, Poole seemed to have an almost preternatural ability to place shots exactly where he intended. His accuracy scores were consistently the highest in his unit, his reaction times faster than men who had been training longer. When asked about his technique, Poole couldn't fully explain it. He just knew where to aim, could feel when the shot was right, trusted his instincts in ways that defied conventional gunnery training. His instructors attributed it to natural talent, never suspecting that the man who was outperforming everyone at the range couldn't actually see properly out of one eye. The significance of Poole's disability cannot be overstated. In 1943, military standards for vision were strict, based on the logical assumption that combat, especially technical combat like tank gunnery, required perfect eyesight. Men were rejected for far less significant vision problems than Poole's damaged eye. The fact that he not only passed the physical but excelled in gunnery training speaks to 2 things. First, the desperate need for soldiers in wartime conditions, and second, Poole's extraordinary ability to compensate for his limitation. He had turned a disability into an advantage, though no one, including Poole himself, fully understood how he did it. But Poole's real test wouldn't come on the training ranges of Fort Knox. It would come on the killing fields of Europe, where German tanks and anti-tank guns had turned the bocage countryside of Normandy and the rolling plains of Belgium into graveyards for Allied armor. It would come in the desperate fighting across France, where American tank crews learned that German gunnery was devastatingly accurate and German armor could shrug off hits that would destroy a Sherman. It was there, in the crucible of actual combat, that Lafayette Poole would prove that he wasn't just a good gunner. He was the best gunner the American Army had ever produced. The choice Poole made to hide or downplay his vision impairment wasn't born of deception, it was born of determination. He wanted to serve, wanted to fight, and knew that his disability would only matter if he let it, so he didn't let it. And in making that choice, in refusing to be defined by what he lacked rather than what he possessed, Poole set himself on a path that would make him a legend. His story was about to begin in earnest, and the battlefields of Europe would never be the same. Poole's transformation from farm boy to warrior began in earnest when he shipped out to England in early 1944 as part of the massive buildup of American forces preparing for the invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe. He was assigned to the 3rd Armored Division, specifically to Company 1 of the 32nd Armored Regiment, a unit that would see some of the heaviest fighting in the European theater. The 3rd Armored Division was known as the Spearhead Division, and it would live up to that name by leading the charge across France, Belgium, and into Germany itself. Poole was assigned as a gunner to a Sherman tank, commanded by a young lieutenant, and it was in this role that he would begin to demonstrate the skills that would make him famous. But before the glory came, the fear, the confusion, and the brutal education that every combat soldier receives when theory meets reality. Poole's first taste of combat came shortly after D-Day, when the 3rd Armored Division pushed inland from the Normandy beaches into the nightmare landscape of the bocage. The bocage was a tanker's nightmare. Ancient hedgerows, thick as walls and tall as houses, divided the Norman countryside into a maze of small fields and narrow lanes where German defenders could set up ambushes with devastating effectiveness. German soldiers, armed with Panzerfaust anti-tank rockets, could hide in the hedgerows and knock out Sherman tanks from point-blank range before the crew even knew they were under attack. German anti-tank guns, camouflaged and positioned with excellent fields of fire, could destroy multiple tanks before revealing their positions. And German tanks, particularly the feared Panther and Tiger models, had guns that could penetrate a Sherman's armor from distances where American guns couldn't even scratch German steel. Poole's first combat engagement was a baptism by fire. His tank was part of a column moving through a narrow lane when German anti-tank fire erupted from the hedgerows. The lead tank exploded in flames, blocking the road. The tank behind it was hit seconds later, its crew scrambling to escape before the ammunition cooked off. Poole's tank, third in line, was trapped in a killing zone with nowhere to go. The enemy guns were hidden in the hedgerows, invisible until they fired, and by the time you saw the muzzle flash, it was often too late. But Poole didn't panic. While the other crew members shouted and swore, while the tank commander screamed orders, and the driver desperately tried to maneuver in the confined space, Poole focused on his job. He scanned the hedgerows through his gun sight, looking for the telltale signs of enemy positions, the slight discoloration in the foliage, the unnatural angles, the barely visible shape of a gun barrel. And then he saw it, a flash of movement, the shadow of a German anti-tank gun being repositioned. Poole didn't hesitate. He traversed the turret, laid the gun on target, and fired in one smooth motion that he had practiced thousands of times in training but never performed under the stress of actual combat. The 76mm shell struck the German position dead center, silencing the gun and sending debris flying into the air. Poole had scored his first kill, and he had done it under pressure that would have broken many men, but there was no time to celebrate. The column was still trapped, still under fire from other positions. Poole reloaded and began systematically engaging targets, calling out German positions to his tank commander, firing and reloading with mechanical precision. By the time the engagement ended and the American tanks had fought their way out of the ambush, Poole had destroyed 3 German anti-tank positions, saving his tank and possibly the entire column from destruction. His tank commander, who had initially doubted the quiet Texan's abilities, became Poole's biggest advocate. Word began to spread through the unit about the gunner who could spot camouflaged positions before anyone else, who could place shots with uncanny accuracy even under fire. But Poole remained humble, almost shy about his achievements. He didn't talk about his kills, didn't brag or boast. He just did his job day after day, engagement after engagement, and his reputation grew with each destroyed enemy tank, each silenced anti-tank gun, each successful engagement against impossible odds. The fighting in Normandy was brutal and relentless. The Germans defended every hedgerow, every village, every crossroads with fanatical determination. American casualties were horrific, particularly among tank crews who faced not just enemy armor, but also swarms of German infantry armed with anti-tank weapons. The average life expectancy of a Sherman tank in combat was measured in days, sometimes hours. Crews that survived multiple engagements were considered veterans, and crews that survived weeks were considered miraculous. Poole's tank somehow kept surviving. Part of it was luck, the random chance that separates the living from the dead in combat. Part of it was the skill of his entire crew, the driver who could maneuver the Sherman through impossible terrain, the loader who could feed shells into the gun with inhuman speed, the tank commander who made smart tactical decisions. But a huge part of it was Poole's ability to engage and destroy enemy threats before those threats could destroy them. His accuracy was becoming legendary. He rarely needed more than one shot to knock out a target, a fact that was remarkable considering the limitations of the Sherman's gun and optics. As the weeks turned into months and the 3rd Armored Division broke out of Normandy and began the race across France, Poole's kill count steadily mounted. By the time the division reached Paris in late August 1944, Poole had destroyed over a dozen German vehicles, including several tanks. But it was in the fighting beyond Paris, as the Allied advance slowed and German resistance stiffened, that Poole would achieve his greatest feats of gunnery. The experience of combat was transforming Poole in ways both obvious and subtle. The shy farm boy was becoming a hardened veteran, his reflexes sharpened by constant danger, his mind conditioned to make life or death decisions in split seconds. But Poole never lost his humanity, never became callous or cruel. He understood that every German tank he destroyed likely meant German soldiers dying in flames, and he took no pleasure in it. He was fighting because his country needed him, because his crew depended on him, and because stopping to think too deeply about the killing would get him and his friends killed. The physical toll of combat was also becoming apparent. Tank crews lived in cramped, uncomfortable conditions, breathing diesel fumes and cordite smoke, enduring temperatures that ranged from freezing cold to sweltering heat. They slept in or beside their tanks, never fully rested, always alert for the next attack. They ate cold rations when they ate at all, and went days without bathing. The noise of combat, the constant roar of engines and guns, was deafening. Many tankers suffered hearing damage, and all suffered from the physical and mental exhaustion of sustained combat operations. But Poole endured. Where other men broke down, where other crews requested transfers or simply gave up, Poole kept going. His damaged eye, which should have been a liability, never seemed to affect his performance. In fact, some of his fellow tankers began to wonder if there was something almost supernatural about Poole's ability to spot and engage targets. How could a man who couldn't see properly out of one eye consistently outshoot gunners with perfect vision? The answer, which Poole himself couldn't fully articulate, lay in the years he had spent compensating for his disability, training his brain to extract maximum information from his good eye and to rely on instinct and experience rather than just visual input. During one particularly intense engagement near the Belgian border, Poole's abilities saved not just his crew, but an entire column of American armor. The column had been advancing along a road when it was ambushed by German tanks positioned in a tree line. The lead American tanks were hit immediately, and the column ground to a halt under devastating fire. German Panthers, with their superior guns and armor, were systematically destroying Sherman after Sherman, and the American crews couldn't even see where the fire was coming from through the smoke and confusion. Poole, positioned in the middle of the column, kept his head. While chaos reigned around him, he methodically scanned the tree line, looking for any sign of the enemy positions. And then he spotted something, a barely perceptible glint of sunlight reflecting off the barrel of a Panther's gun. Poole traversed his turret and fired instantly, trusting his instincts about the range and angle. The shell struck the Panther directly, and the German tank erupted in flames, revealing its position to the rest of the American force. But Poole wasn't done. He spotted a second Panther, partially concealed behind a burning building, and destroyed it with his next shot. Then a third, firing from a hull-down position that made it almost invisible. Poole's rounds found their marks with mechanical precision, each shot placed exactly where it needed to be to disable or destroy the target. By the time the engagement ended, Poole had destroyed 4 German tanks and 2 anti-tank guns, single-handedly breaking the ambush and allowing the American column to continue advancing. His tank commander recommended him for a Silver Star, and word of Poole's incredible shooting spread throughout the division. Senior officers began visiting his unit, wanting to meet the gunner with the impossible accuracy. But Poole remained modest, almost embarrassed by the attention. When asked how he managed such precise shooting, he would shrug and say he just aimed where it felt right, that he trusted his training and his instincts. He couldn't explain that his brain had learned to process spatial information differently than other people, that his years of compensating for monocular vision had given him abilities that went beyond normal gunnery skills. By September 1944, as the 3rd Armored Division approached the German border, Poole had achieved something remarkable. He had survived months of continuous combat, had participated in dozens of engagements, and had destroyed over 20 enemy vehicles. He was being considered for promotion and commendations, but what Poole wanted most was simply to keep his crew alive and to keep doing his job. The war was far from over, and the hardest fighting was still ahead. Germany's borders were now threatened, and the Wehrmacht would defend its homeland with desperate ferocity. Poole's crew had developed into a finely tuned combat machine. They knew each other's movements instinctively, could communicate with minimal words, functioned as a single organism rather than 5 separate individuals. The loader knew exactly when Poole would be ready for the next round and what type of ammunition he would need. The driver anticipated Poole's need for positioning adjustments, moving the tank to give Poole the best possible firing angle. The tank commander trusted Poole's judgment completely, often allowing him to engage targets without explicit orders, because Poole could identify and prioritize threats faster than anyone else. This level of teamwork, combined with Poole's exceptional individual skills, made his tank one of the most effective combat vehicles in the entire 3rd Armored Division. Other crews studied their tactics, trying to learn the secret of their success. But there was no single secret, just the combination of individual excellence, team cohesion, relentless practice, and the intangible factor of Poole's compensatory abilities that no one, including Poole, fully understood. Poole's story was entering its most dramatic chapter. The shy, partially blind farm boy from Texas had become one of the most effective tank gunners in the American Army, but his greatest achievements and his greatest tests were still to come. The next 3 months would see him reach heights of combat effectiveness that military historians still struggle to explain, and would cement his place in military history as a warrior who refused to let anything, not physical disability, not enemy armor, not the chaos and horror of war, stop him from being the best at what he did. At the heart of Lafayette Pool's story lies a profound truth about human capability that challenges conventional wisdom and military doctrine. Physical perfection is not a prerequisite for excellence in combat. Pool's success as a gunner, despite his visual impairment, forces us to reconsider fundamental assumptions about disability, capability, and the nature of expertise itself. His story isn't just about one man's triumph over adversity. It's a case study in how limitations can be transformed into advantages through adaptation, determination, and a complete refusal to accept imposed boundaries. The concept of compensation is central to understanding Pool's achievement. Modern neuroscience has confirmed what Pool demonstrated on the battlefields of Europe. The human brain possesses remarkable plasticity, the ability to rewire itself to compensate for deficits in sensory input or physical capability. When Pool lost effective use of his left eye, his brain didn't simply accept a 50% reduction in visual capability. Instead, it adapted, enhancing the processing power devoted to his right eye, developing enhanced spatial reasoning abilities, and creating new neural pathways that allowed him to judge distances and angles with accuracy that exceeded what most people achieve with binocular vision. This neurological adaptation gave Pool advantages that weren't immediately obvious. His enhanced monocular vision meant he could focus intensely on his gun sight without the distraction of peripheral information from a second eye. His brain, trained since childhood to extract maximum information from minimal visual input, could process targeting data faster and more efficiently than gunners relying on normal binocular vision. And perhaps most importantly, Pool's years of compensating for his disability had taught him to trust his instincts, to act on intuition developed through constant practice, rather than overthinking the mechanics of aiming and firing. But Pool's success wasn't just about neurology or compensation, it was also about mindset, about the choice he made every single day to refuse to be defined by what he lacked rather than what he possessed. In an era when disability often meant exclusion, when physical limitations were seen as disqualifying rather than challenges to overcome, Pool simply rejected the entire premise. He didn't see himself as disabled, he saw himself as different, and he turned that difference into a strength. This mindset, this absolute refusal to accept limitations, was perhaps Pool's greatest weapon, more powerful even than his exceptional gunnery skills. The military implications of Pool's story are profound and continue to resonate today. His success challenges the rigid physical standards that have historically been used to screen military personnel. If a man who was effectively blind in one eye could become the deadliest tank gunner in American history, what does that say about the validity of physical standards that exclude people with disabilities from military service? Pool's story suggests that adaptability, intelligence, and determination may be more important than physical perfection in many military roles, and that the military may be excluding talented individuals based on outdated assumptions about capability. Pool's story also illuminates the nature of expertise itself. Modern research into expert performance has identified several key characteristics that separate true experts from merely competent practitioners. The ability to recognize patterns instantly, to make accurate decisions under extreme pressure, to perform complex tasks automatically without conscious thought, and to continue learning and improving even at the highest levels of performance. Pool demonstrated all of these characteristics. His ability to spot camouflaged enemy positions before others could see them showed advanced pattern recognition. His consistent accuracy under fire demonstrated decision-making ability under pressure. His smooth, almost automatic gunnery technique showed that he had achieved what psychologists call unconscious competence, where skilled performance becomes instinctive. And his steadily mounting kill count throughout his combat career showed that he continued improving even as he operated at the highest level. The concept of situational awareness is another central theme in Pool's story. Effective tank gunnery isn't just about accurate shooting, it's about understanding the tactical situation, anticipating enemy movements, knowing where threats are likely to appear, and engaging targets in the optimal sequence. Pool excelled at all of these aspects of gunnery. His crews consistently reported that he seemed to know where enemy tanks would appear before they actually did, that he could prioritize targets almost instantly, selecting the greatest threats first and engaging them in an order that maximized the crew's survival chances. This level of situational awareness, combined with his exceptional marksmanship, made Poole not just a good gunner, but a complete combat system unto himself. The psychological dimension of Poole's achievement cannot be overlooked. Combat, particularly armored combat in World War II, was psychologically devastating. Tank crews faced the constant knowledge that a single enemy shot could turn their vehicle into a flaming coffin, that they could be burned alive or killed instantly with no warning. The psychological stress of this knowledge, combined with the physical exhaustion of sustained operations, broke many men. Yet Poole endured months of continuous combat without breaking, without losing his edge, without allowing fear to degrade his performance. His psychological resilience, his ability to function at peak effectiveness, even under the most extreme stress, was as remarkable as his physical gunnery skills. Poole's story also raises questions about leadership and organizational effectiveness. His company commander and unit leadership recognized his extraordinary abilities and allowed him to operate with considerable autonomy, trusting his judgment and supporting his methods even when they were unconventional. This organizational flexibility, this willingness to let exceptional individuals operate outside normal parameters, contributed to Poole's effectiveness. In more rigid organizations, Poole's disability might have been discovered, and he might have been removed from combat duty, regardless of his proven abilities. The fact that his leaders focused on results rather than regulations allowed Poole to continue doing what he did best, destroying enemy tanks and keeping his crew alive. The theme of intuitive decision-making also emerges powerfully from Poole's combat record. In the chaos of armored combat, there is rarely time for deliberate analytical thinking. Decisions must be made in fractions of a second, based on incomplete information and under extreme stress. Poole had developed what cognitive psychologists call recognition-primed decision-making, the ability to instantly recognize patterns from past experience and respond appropriately without conscious analysis. When Poole spotted an enemy position, he didn't consciously think through the steps of engaging it. His brain instantly recognized the pattern, calculated the necessary response, and executed it automatically. This level of intuitive expertise, built through thousands of hours of practice and dozens of combat engagements, allowed Poole to respond faster than gunners who were still consciously processing information and making deliberate decisions. The broader theme of individual impact in modern warfare emerges powerfully from Poole's story. In World War II, with millions of men under arms and battles involving thousands of vehicles, it's easy to assume that individual performance mattered little, that victory was purely a matter of numbers and industrial capacity. But Poole's story proves otherwise. One man in the right place with the right skills could have a disproportionate impact on combat outcomes. The 37 enemy vehicles Poole destroyed represented significant enemy combat power eliminated, and his actions in specific engagements may have tipped the balance between victory and defeat for his unit. The concept of deliberate practice, a term coined by psychologist Anders Ericsson to describe the type of focused, goal-oriented practice that builds expertise, is also central to Poole's story. Poole didn't just practice gunnery, he practiced deliberately, focusing on specific skills, seeking feedback, identifying weaknesses, and working systematically to improve them. During training, he spent extra hours on the range, not just shooting but analyzing each shot, understanding why it hit or missed, adjusting his technique based on results. This commitment to deliberate practice, combined with his combat experience, accelerated his development into a world-class gunner. Finally, Poole's story touches on the theme of hidden potential and the danger of assumptions. How many other Lafayette Pools were turned away from military service because of physical characteristics that evaluators assumed would prevent effective performance? How many potential experts in any field are excluded because of disabilities or differences that are actually irrelevant to, or even advantageous for, the task at hand? Poole's success suggests that human potential is far more diverse and adaptable than we typically recognize, and that our methods for identifying and developing talent may exclude individuals who could excel if given the opportunity. These themes, compensation, mindset, expertise, situational awareness, psychological resilience, organizational flexibility, intuitive decision-making, Individual impact, deliberate practice, and hidden potential interweave throughout Pool's story and give it significance beyond the simple narrative of one soldier's combat effectiveness. His story challenges us to reconsider fundamental assumptions about capability, to recognize that excellence can emerge from unexpected sources, and to understand that human adaptability and determination can overcome obstacles that seem insurmountable. Pool didn't just prove that a partially blind man could be an effective tank gunner, he proved that a partially blind man could be the best tank gunner, and in doing so, he expanded our understanding of what's possible when determination meets opportunity. The practical lessons that emerge from Lafayette Pool's story extend far beyond the narrow confines of World War II tank gunnery. His success offers insights into human performance, organizational effectiveness, and the development of expertise that remain relevant today, in military contexts and far beyond. Understanding how Pool achieved what he did and what enabled his success provides a framework for developing exceptional performance in any demanding field. Pool's most fundamental solution to his visual impairment was relentless practice and preparation. He understood instinctively that he couldn't rely on natural ability alone, that his disability meant he would need to work harder and smarter than everyone else. So he did. During training, while other soldiers were relaxing, Pool was studying tank manuals, memorizing firing tables, and practicing his gunnery technique mentally. He developed what modern sports psychologists call mental rehearsal, visualizing engagements and his responses to them, programming his muscle memory so thoroughly that his actions under fire would be automatic. This commitment to preparation extended to his maintenance of his equipment. Pool's gun sight was always immaculately clean, his gun perfectly maintained, his ammunition carefully inspected. He understood that in combat, equipment failures could mean death, and he refused to let something as preventable as a dirty gun sight or a malfunctioning mechanism compromise his effectiveness. His attention to detail, his refusal to accept anything less than perfect equipment condition, was legendary within his unit. Other crews might cut corners. Pool never did. Pool also developed a systematic approach to target acquisition that compensated for his limited depth perception. Rather than relying purely on visual estimation of range, which would have been difficult with monocular vision, Pool learned to use terrain features as references. He would identify landmarks at known distances, use them to create a mental grid of the battlefield, and then estimate target ranges based on their position relative to these landmarks. This technique, combined with his extensive study of firing tables, allowed him to make accurate range estimations that matched or exceeded what gunners with perfect vision could achieve. Another key insight from Pool's success involves the importance of crew coordination. Tank gunnery isn't a solo activity. It requires seamless teamwork between the gunner, loader, tank commander, driver, and assistant driver. Pool understood this completely and worked to develop perfect synchronization with his crew members. He communicated constantly with his tank commander, sharing what he saw and heard, helping to build a complete picture of the tactical situation. He developed timing with his loader so perfect that shells seemed to appear in the breech the instant he was ready to fire, and he trusted his driver implicitly to position the tank for optimal firing angles and to maneuver evasively when under threat. This crew coordination extended to an almost telepathic level of understanding. Pool's tank commanders reported that they often didn't need to give him targeting commands. He would identify and engage threats before the commander had finished assessing the situation. His loader learned to anticipate the type of ammunition Pool would need based on the tactical situation, loading the appropriate round, armor-piercing or high explosive before Pool even called for it. This level of teamwork, built on trust, practice, and shared combat experience, multiplied Pool's individual effectiveness exponentially. Pool's approach to threat prioritization offers another important lesson. In combat, multiple threats often present themselves simultaneously, and effective gunners must decide instantly which target to engage first. Pool developed an intuitive threat assessment system that considered multiple factors: the immediate danger each enemy vehicle posed, the likelihood of successfully destroying it with the first shot, the position of friendly forces, and the tactical implications of engaging one target versus another. This decision-making process happened in milliseconds, but it was informed by deep tactical understanding and combat experience. A crucial insight from Pool's story involves the management of fear and stress. Combat is terrifying, and fear is a natural, inevitable response to life-threatening situations. Poole didn't overcome fear by being fearless. He overcame it by accepting its presence and refusing to let it control his actions. He developed techniques that modern psychologists would recognize as mindfulness and stress management. He would focus intensely on the immediate task, narrowing his attention to the mechanical aspects of gunnery, the sight picture, the trigger squeeze, the sound of the gun firing, using this focus to push fear to the periphery of his consciousness, where it couldn't interfere with his performance. Poole also understood the importance of rest and recovery, even in combat conditions. While he pushed himself hard, he also recognized that exhaustion degraded performance. He would take every opportunity to rest, even if only for a few minutes, understanding that a few moments of genuine sleep could restore his alertness and reaction time. He ate whenever food was available, maintaining his physical condition even when circumstances made regular meals impossible, and he stayed connected to his crew emotionally, maintaining morale through humor and camaraderie, understanding that psychological resilience was as important as physical capability. The organizational lesson from Poole's story involves the importance of recognizing and nurturing exceptional talent. Poole's commanders could have responded to his success in several ways. They could have transferred him to a training role, using him to teach others. They could have promoted him out of the gunner's position into leadership roles. They could have restricted his operations, worried that his luck would eventually run out and they would lose a valuable soldier. Instead, they let him continue doing what he did best, fighting. They gave him the best equipment available, supported his crew, and allowed him to operate with considerable tactical autonomy. This enlightened leadership approach, focusing on maximizing Poole's contributions rather than fitting him into standard organizational structures, enabled him to achieve far more than would otherwise have been possible. Poole's approach to learning and improvement offers yet another valuable insight. Even as he became recognized as an exceptional gunner, he never stopped learning. After every engagement, he would mentally review his performance, analyzing what worked and what could have been done better. He sought feedback from his tank commander and crew members, asking for their observations and suggestions. He studied German tactics, learning to anticipate enemy behavior and positioning. He observed other skilled gunners, looking for techniques he could incorporate into his own approach. This commitment to continuous improvement, this refusal to be satisfied with his current level of performance, no matter how good it was, exemplified the mindset of true experts in any field. The physiological insight from Poole's story involves the concept of sensory substitution and enhancement. When one sensory channel is impaired, the brain often compensates by enhancing others. Poole may have developed enhanced proprioception, the sense of body position and movement, allowing him to feel when the gun was properly aimed even without perfect visual confirmation. He may have had enhanced auditory processing, allowing him to locate enemy vehicles by sound before seeing them. And he certainly developed enhanced pattern recognition, his brain becoming exceptionally skilled at extracting meaningful information from partial or ambiguous visual data. Poole's tactical innovations also deserve recognition. He developed techniques for using terrain to his advantage, positioning his tank so that enemy fire would strike at oblique angles where the Sherman's armor was more effective. He learned to use concealment and cover masterfully, exposing his tank only when necessary to engage targets, and then withdrawing immediately to protected positions. He understood the importance of firing position, always seeking locations that gave him clear fields of fire while minimizing his exposure to enemy weapons. These tactical skills, combined with his exceptional marksmanship, made him a complete combat operator rather than just a skilled shooter. Poole's story also demonstrates the importance of having a clear sense of purpose and mission. He wasn't fighting for abstractions like freedom or democracy, though he believed in those principles. He was fighting to keep his crew alive, to support his fellow soldiers, and to end the war so he could go home. This concrete personal sense of mission sustained him through months of combat when broader ideological motivations might have faltered. He understood exactly why he was fighting and what he was fighting for, and this clarity of purpose helped maintain his motivation and commitment even under the most difficult circumstances. The concept of adaptive expertise, the ability to apply knowledge and skills flexibly in new situations rather than just reproducing learned procedures, is also central to Poole's success. He didn't just follow standard gunnery procedures, he adapted his techniques based on the specific tactical situation, the terrain, the enemy, and the capabilities of his own tank. This flexibility, this ability to improvise and innovate while maintaining fundamental technical excellence, distinguished Poole from merely competent gunners who could only perform well under standard conditions. Finally, Poole's success illustrates the power of quiet competence over flashy heroics. He wasn't a glory seeker, didn't take unnecessary risks to pad his kill count, didn't grandstand or seek recognition. He simply did his job, day after day, with steady, reliable excellence. This understated approach to excellence, focusing on consistent performance rather than dramatic achievements, is often more effective in the long run than more flamboyant alternatives. Poole understood that in combat, survival and effectiveness came from solid fundamentals, not from trying to be a hero. These solutions and insights, from rigorous preparation to crew coordination, from stress management to continuous learning, from organizational flexibility to quiet competence, form a comprehensive framework for achieving exceptional performance under extremely demanding conditions. Poole didn't just succeed despite his disability. He succeeded because he developed systems, techniques, and mindsets that allowed him to maximize his strengths while compensating for his weakness. His approach offers lessons for anyone seeking to achieve excellence in challenging circumstances, whether in military service, competitive sports, professional pursuits, or personal development. The real solution Poole discovered wasn't a single technique or trick. It was a comprehensive approach to performance that integrated physical skills, mental preparation, emotional resilience, and organizational support into a complete system that enabled extraordinary achievement. Lafayette Poole's story, while inspiring, also raises difficult questions about military policy, the morality of warfare, and the complex relationship between individual achievement and collective tragedy. Any honest examination of his legacy must grapple with these uncomfortable complexities, recognizing that heroism and horror often coexist on the battlefield, and that celebrating combat effectiveness necessarily involves acknowledging the human cost of war. The first critical question involves military medical standards and the ethics of combat deployment. Poole served with distinction despite having a physical condition that, had it been properly documented, would have disqualified him from combat duty. His success proves that the military's vision standards were too restrictive, that they excluded individuals who could have served effectively. But does this mean those standards should be eliminated or revised? The issue is more complex than Poole's individual case suggests. Medical standards exist, not just to ensure combat effectiveness, but also to protect service members from unnecessary risk. A tank gunner with impaired vision, even one as skilled as Poole, arguably faced greater danger than one with perfect eyesight. Did the military have an ethical obligation to protect Poole from that risk, even if he was willing to accept it? Or did Poole's right to serve and prove himself override concerns about his safety? This question becomes even more complicated when we consider that Poole's disability was apparently not discovered during his service, or if discovered, was overlooked by commanders focused on his combat effectiveness. In wartime, when the need for skilled soldiers is desperate, should military standards be relaxed to allow capable individuals with disabilities to serve? Or does maintaining strict standards, even if they exclude some capable individuals, protect both the military and the individuals involved? Poole's story doesn't provide easy answers to these questions. It merely highlights the tension between individual capability and institutional policy. A second area of critical reflection involves the nature of Poole's achievement itself. We celebrate him as America's deadliest tank gunner, but what does that celebration actually mean? Each of the 37 vehicles Poole destroyed likely contained German soldiers, young men who may have been conscripts rather than committed Nazis, who had families and futures that were cut short. The German tanks Poole destroyed with such precision became coffins for their crews, who died by burning, by concussion, by dismemberment. To celebrate Poole's effectiveness is, unavoidably, to celebrate killing, to admire the destruction of human life, even if we recognize that such destruction was necessary to defeat Nazi Germany. This moral complexity is inherent in all discussions of combat effectiveness. We can acknowledge Poole's extraordinary skill, his courage, and his service to his country while also recognizing that war itself is tragedy, that every destroyed tank represents lives ended, families shattered, human potential extinguished. Poole himself seemed to understand this. Those who knew him reported that he took no joy in killing, that he saw his role as necessary but not glorious, that he understood the human cost of every round he fired. This sober recognition of the moral weight of combat separates true warriors from mere killers, but it doesn't eliminate the fundamental ethical complexity of celebrating combat prowess. A third critical question involves the relationship between individual achievement and collective effort. Poole's story focuses on his individual excellence, his exceptional gunnery skills, his personal courage and determination. But this focus can obscure the reality that Poole's success depended on countless others. His loader, whose name is often forgotten in histories that celebrate Poole, was equally essential to their team's effectiveness. His tank commander made the tactical decisions that positioned Poole for success. His driver maneuvered the tank and kept it running. The maintenance crews kept his vehicle operational. The logistics personnel ensured he had ammunition. The infantry protected his tank from close-range anti-tank weapons. The artillery suppressed enemy positions. The air forces provided cover and reconnaissance. In other words, Poole's individual achievement was enabled by a massive organizational effort involving thousands of people, most of whom will never be remembered or celebrated. This isn't to diminish Poole's accomplishments, but rather to recognize that military effectiveness is always collective, that individual excellence emerges from and depends on organizational support. The danger in celebrating individuals like Poole is that we may overlook the countless others whose contributions were equally essential, but less visible, less dramatic, less easily quantified. Comparing Poole to other celebrated warriors of World War II and other conflicts raises additional questions about how we measure and value combat effectiveness. Audie Murphy, America's most decorated soldier of World War II, achieved fame for acts of individual heroism that were witnessed by many and easily documented. Fighter aces like Richard Bong achieved fame through kill counts that could be verified and compared. But how do we appropriately recognize and compare achievements across different combat roles? Is a tank gunner who destroys 37 vehicles more or less valuable than an infantryman who holds a critical position against overwhelming odds? Than a medic who saves dozens of wounded soldiers under fire? Than an engineer who clears minefields so his unit can advance? The emphasis on quantifiable metrics, like kill counts, can distort our understanding of military effectiveness and valor. Poole's 37 destroyed vehicles are impressive, precisely because they can be counted and compared, but this countability may overstate their importance relative to contributions that are harder to quantify. The tank driver who never fired a shot but kept his vehicle running through months of combat. The supply sergeant who ensured units had the parts they needed. The intelligence analyst who provided accurate enemy information. All made essential contributions that don't lend themselves to dramatic statistics and impressive numbers. Another area for critical reflection involves the psychological cost of Poole's service. He survived the war physically intact, but what was the psychological toll of months of continuous combat, of killing enemy soldiers, of seeing friends die, of living under constant threat of violent death? Poole rarely spoke about the war after returning home, and this reticence may suggest psychological wounds that he carried for the rest of his life. The warrior culture that celebrates toughness and stoicism can make it difficult for combat veterans to acknowledge or seek help for psychological trauma, and Poole's generation of veterans had almost no support or understanding for what we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder. The story of Poole's post-war life, which is often glossed over in accounts celebrating his combat achievements, raises questions about how society treats its combat veterans. After displaying extraordinary capability and effectiveness in warfare, Poole returned to civilian life and relative obscurity, working ordinary jobs, living a quiet life far from the acclaim his wartime service might have warranted. Did American society adequately recognize and honor his service? Did the military provide sufficient support for his transition to civilian life? Did Poole himself want recognition, or did he prefer the anonymity of normal life after the intensity of combat? These questions highlight the complex relationship between military service and civilian society, between war and peace, between the warrior role and civilian identity. Poole's story also invites comparison with philosophical traditions regarding warriors and warfare. The samurai code of Bushido, the medieval chivalric tradition, the Spartan warrior ethos, all these historical approaches to warfare emphasized not just combat effectiveness, but also broader virtues like honor, loyalty, self-discipline, and compassion. How does Poole's approach to warfare align with or differ from these traditions? His quiet competence, his lack of boastfulness, his focus on duty rather than glory suggest alignment with the better aspects of warrior traditions. But the industrial, mechanized nature of modern warfare, where combat effectiveness is measured in destroyed vehicles rather than honorable conduct, represents a fundamental departure from earlier warrior cultures. The question of how we should remember and honor Poole specifically, and combat veterans generally, is also worth examining critically. Military history often focuses on combat achievements, kill counts, acts of heroism under fire. But is this the most appropriate way to honor those who served? Should we instead emphasize their service itself, their willingness to risk their lives for their country, regardless of their specific combat achievements? Should we focus more on the sacrifices they made and the hardships they endured than on the enemies they killed? These questions don't have simple answers, but they deserve consideration as we reflect on Poole's legacy and the legacy of all who served in combat. The relationship between Poole's disability and his achievement also deserves deeper examination. Did his visual impairment actually contribute to his success in ways that went beyond simple compensation? Some researchers have suggested that monocular vision can provide advantages in certain tasks requiring precise depth judgment at specific distances as the brain develops alternative cues for spatial relationships. Poole's success might not just be despite his disability, but partially because of it, because the neural adaptations his brain made to compensate for lost binocular vision actually created processing advantages for the specific task of tank gunnery. If true, this would further complicate our understanding of disability and capability. Finally, Poole's story raises questions about disability and capability that extend beyond military contexts. His success, despite his visual impairment, challenges us to reconsider how we think about disability in general. Are disabilities primarily limitations, deficits that reduce capability, or are they better understood as differences that require adaptation but don't necessarily reduce overall capability? Poole's story suggests the latter, but his case is complicated by the fact that he concealed his disability, suggesting that society's response to disability, not the disability itself, may be the primary obstacle. What does this say about how we accommodate, integrate, and support people with disabilities in all areas of life? These critical reflections don't diminish Poole's achievements or his service. Rather, they place those achievements in broader contexts, acknowledging the complexity of warfare, the moral weight of combat, the collective nature of military effectiveness, and the psychological costs of serving. Poole was an exceptional soldier who served his country courageously and effectively under extraordinarily difficult circumstances. But he was also a human being, flawed and finite like all of us, who paid psychological costs for his service that are often overlooked in celebrating his combat prowess. Any complete understanding of his legacy must grapple with these complexities, honoring his service while also acknowledging the broader human dimensions of warfare and military service. Lafayette Green Pool survived the war. After destroying 37 enemy vehicles in just 3 months of intense combat, after proving himself the deadliest tank gunner in American military history, after demonstrating that determination and skill could overcome seemingly insurmountable physical limitations, he lived to see Nazi Germany defeated and to return home to Texas. But the story of what happened to him after the war is, in many ways, as revealing as his combat record, and it speaks to both the best and worst of how America treats its warriors when the shooting stops. On September 30th, 1944, during heavy fighting in Belgium, Poole's luck finally ran out. His tank was hit by a German anti-tank round that killed his driver and wounded Poole himself. The injury was serious enough to end his combat service, but not serious enough to prevent his recovery. He was evacuated to England for treatment, then eventually returned to the United States. His war finally over after months of continuous frontline combat that would have broken most men. He had earned numerous decorations for his service, including the Silver Star, Bronze Star, and Purple Heart. But more importantly, he had earned the respect and admiration of every man who had served with him. Poole was honorably discharged from the army and returned to Texas, to the same small-town world he had left years earlier when he enlisted to fight for his country. And then, in what must rank as one of the most remarkable examples of humility and unpretentiousness in American military history, Lafayette Poole simply faded back into normal life. He worked various jobs, including as a maintenance worker and security guard. He married and raised a family. He rarely spoke about the war, didn't seek recognition or celebrity, didn't trade on his combat record or exceptional service. He lived quietly, ordinarily, in the same part of Texas where he had been born, as if the years of combat, the 37 destroyed tanks, the proof that a partially blind farm boy could become an unstoppable warrior, had all been just a temporary interruption in a normal life. This quiet return to civilian life was characteristic of Poole's generation of veterans. Millions of American men had served in World War II, had experienced combat, had done extraordinary things under impossible circumstances, and then simply come home and resumed their lives. They built families and careers, contributed to the post-war economic boom, and rarely discussed their wartime experiences. This was partly cultural, a generational tendency towards stoicism and modesty, and partly psychological, an understandable reluctance to revisit traumatic experiences. But it meant that men like Poole, whose achievements deserved recognition and whose service had been exceptional, often lived and died in obscurity. Poole passed away on May 26, 1991, at the age of 71. His obituary in local Texas newspapers noted his military service but didn't capture the full scope of his achievements. No national media covered his death. No ceremonies or memorials beyond the standard funeral honored his passing. The man who had been America's deadliest tank gunner, who had proven that disability need not be limitation, who had survived months of combat that killed so many others, died as he had lived after the war, quietly and without fanfare. But Poole's legacy extends far beyond his lifetime, and in the years since his death, military historians and armor enthusiasts have worked to ensure that his story is not forgotten. His combat record has been documented and studied, his techniques analyzed, his achievements recognized as among the most impressive in American armor history. Schools and training centers use his story as an example of what exceptional gunnery looks like, of how adaptability and determination can overcome limitations, of how individual excellence can emerge from unexpected sources. The deeper significance of Poole's story transcends the specifics of tank gunnery or World War II combat. His life demonstrates fundamental truths about human capability and potential that remain relevant today. He proved that physical limitations need not define us, that disability can be transformed into difference, and difference into advantage through intelligence, determination, and relentless effort. He showed that excellence often comes from unexpected places, that the most unlikely candidates can become the most effective performers if given opportunity and support. He demonstrated that quiet competence is often more valuable than flashy heroics, that steady, reliable performance over time beats dramatic but inconsistent achievement. Poole's story also reminds us of the countless other individuals whose potential contributions we may be missing because of narrow assumptions about who can succeed and what qualifications matter. How many people with disabilities are excluded from opportunities where they could excel because evaluators focus on limitations rather than capabilities? How many unconventional candidates are rejected from military service, from employment, from educational programs, because they don't fit standard profiles even though they possess the actual abilities required for success? Poole's achievement suggests that we systematically underestimate human adaptability and capability, that our screening and selection processes may be excluding individuals who could make extraordinary contributions if given the chance. The military lessons from Poole's career remain relevant to contemporary armor operations. Modern tank gunnery is far more technologically advanced than what Poole experienced, with laser rangefinders, ballistic computers, and thermal sights that would seem like science fiction to a World War II tanker. But the fundamental principles that made Poole effective, situational awareness, threat prioritization, crew coordination, stress management, continuous learning, remain just as important today. The technology has changed, but the human factors that separate adequate gunners from exceptional ones are largely the same. Military training programs still study Poole's techniques and achievements, extracting lessons that can be applied to contemporary operations. Beyond the military realm, Poole's story speaks to anyone facing obstacles or limitations, physical, circumstantial, or otherwise. His life suggests that the proper response to limitation is not resignation, but adaptation, that challenges are opportunities to develop compensatory strengths, that determination and creativity can overcome obstacles that seem insurmountable. This is not naive optimism or false inspiration. Poole didn't succeed through positive thinking or by ignoring his disability. He succeeded through relentless preparation, intelligent adaptation, and the development of skills that compensated for and even exceeded what normal capabilities would have provided. The story of Lafayette Poole also serves as a reminder of what war actually costs. We can celebrate his effectiveness, admire his skill, and honor his service. But we should also remember that his achievements came at tremendous psychological cost, that he carried the weight of his combat experiences for the rest of his life, that the young farm boy who enlisted in 1941 was transformed by the war into someone different, marked by experiences that civilians could never fully understand. The quiet, modest life he lived after the war, his reluctance to discuss his combat service, his desire to simply be normal, all suggest a man who had seen and done things he wished he could forget, who wanted only to move beyond the horror and violence of his wartime experiences. And yet, when his country needed him, Poole served. Despite his disability, despite the odds against survival, despite the horror of armored combat in World War II, he did his duty and did it better than almost anyone else. He kept his crew alive through months of combat when the average lifespan of a Sherman tank was measured in days. He destroyed enemy tanks that were killing American soldiers. He contributed to the defeat of Nazi Germany and the preservation of freedom in Europe. These achievements matter, not because killing is glorious, but because in that time and place with that enemy, such service was necessary, and Poole provided it with exceptional effectiveness. The partially blind farm boy from Texas, who became America's deadliest tank gunner, represents something essential about the American character at its best: the refusal to be limited by circumstances, the determination to prove oneself through performance rather than credentials, the willingness to serve something larger than oneself, and the quiet humility that seeks no recognition beyond the knowledge of having done the job well. Poole didn't fight for glory or fame. He fought because his country needed him, because his crew depended on him, and because it was the right thing to do. In the final analysis, what makes Poole's story so compelling is not just the statistics, impressive though they are, but the human dimension behind them. Here was a man who had every reason to accept limitations, who could have lived his life within the boundaries that society and circumstance had drawn for him. Instead, he chose to push beyond those boundaries, to prove that determination and skill could overcome physical imperfection, to show that the human spirit could triumph over seemingly insurmountable obstacles. His success wasn't guaranteed, wasn't foreordained. It came through hard work, intelligent adaptation, and an absolute refusal to quit. Poole's legacy challenges each of us to examine our own assumptions about limitation and capability, about who can succeed and under what circumstances. It invites us to consider whether the boundaries we accept in our own lives are real constraints or merely accepted conventions that could be overcome with sufficient determination and creativity. It reminds us that human potential is far more diverse and adaptable than we typically recognize, and that extraordinary achievements can emerge from the most unlikely sources if we're willing to look beyond conventional qualifications and give people the opportunity to prove themselves. In the end, Lafayette Green Pool's legacy isn't really about tanks or gunnery or combat statistics. It's about human potential and the refusal to accept imposed limitations. It's about the power of adaptation and the triumph of determination over adversity. It's about excellence emerging from unexpected places and unlikely candidates. And it's about the ordinary men who, when faced with extraordinary circumstances, rose to meet the challenge and proved themselves capable of achievements that no one thought possible. The partially blind tank gunner who destroyed 37 enemy vehicles in 3 months didn't just contribute to winning a war. He expanded our understanding of what's possible when courage, determination, and skill meet opportunity. And his legacy continues to inspire and instruct us today, more than 8 decades after he climbed into a Sherman tank and began his journey toward becoming a legend.